In Chapter 6, we depart Manhattan and motor 60 miles up the Hudson River to Cornwall-on-Hudson, New York. The next leg sees us motoring another 60 miles up the beautiful Hudson River Valley to Catskill Creek, where we stop at Riverview Marine and prepare to take the boat's mast off. With Phantasia's heavy mast now stored on deck, in our just-built mast cradle, we motor 45 miles in the rain from Catskill to Lock 1 of the Erie Barge Canal at Troy, New York, and then tie up overnight at the Waterford Town Dock.
Said they've been across the Atlantic twice.
Must go like crazy. Yeah, they came from
This time from the Cape Verde.
Cape Verde, yeah. Passing under the George Washington Bridge, we are pushed by the Atlantic tide, enjoying a 1-knot boost in speed. Manhattan's skyline recedes behind us as we pass Yonkers on starboard, then the magnificent vertical cliffs of New Jersey's Palisades to port. Once under the Tappan Zee bridge, the imposing sight of Sing Sing prison looms from starboard. The hectic pace of Manhattan, now quickly forgotten, is replaced by the green hills of Bear Mountain State Park as we glide up the river and under the Bear Mountain Bridge and into the steep valley beyond. Continuing on, passing West Point to port, we find our planned overnight anchorage on the river's shoulder, just outside of the town of Cornwall-on-Hudson, from where we sit, anchored for the night, enjoying the rising moon and passing freighter traffic. The next day takes us 45 miles further upriver and nearer the Adirondack Mountains, leaving the Allegheny foothills behind. We pass Poughkeepsie to starboard, which apparently derives its name from the native Wappinger language.
Yeah, that's kind of neat. There doesn't seem to be any cars on it. It's just people walking across that old span.
There are spectacular homes and estates hidden in the dense forests that line the river's banks, including that of Franklin D. Roosevelt just north of Poughkeepsie, and another of Vanderbilt's mansions just upriver from that. Passing one of the many dormant concrete plants that line this section of the river, we finally spy Buoy 119 that marks the turn into Catskill Creek and Riverview Marine. It's a wonderful stop. The creek's banks are lush, tree-lined, and docks that are home to many small craft proceed upstream.
The bigger of the two?
It's within walking distance to the historic town of Catskill, and at the creek's mouth there is an information center and restaurant with outdoor patio. Riverview Marine has a mast crane and crew capable of pulling Phantasia's heavy 50-foot aluminum mast. We'll lay the mast fore and aft along the deck, propped up by a 6x6 stern brace and midships and bow cradles that we've built from wood scavenged from the marina's shared sailor's woodpile. It's a daunting task and not something we've attempted before, but we're given a good tip to start. That is to string a line from the bow pulpit to stern, then create the cradle under it. By late the following day, with the help of Riverview's expert crew and their vintage mast crane, our mast is laid out on deck and ratcheted down firmly, using heavy nylon ratchet straps we've brought just for this purpose. One of the boats near our home port of Coburg on Lake Ontario made this same trip last year, and had informed us that the heavy ratchet straps are essential in keeping the mast stable once on deck. Also nice to have is a good sharp saw and a variety of sturdy fasteners, such as a box of 3 or 4 inch deck screws, as well as a handful of bolts in various lengths, 4 to 6 inches. If you don't have the needed components to build a cradle, not to worry. There's a hardware store not too far from the marina where all these parts may be purchased. We're exhausted but ready to start the next part of the journey, upriver to Albany and then to Troy, New York, where the first of the many locks that will allow us to climb the nearly 600 vertical feet back into Lake Ontario begins. This section of the river is the most wild. The banks are thickly wooded by immense hardwoods, with houses and towns fewer and farther between. There's a modest amount of pleasure boat traffic, interspersed with a few tugs pushing barges. We spot wild turkeys, eagles, a coyote, and deer grazing on shore. We puzzle over the purpose of the miles and miles of vertical wooden walls constructed along both rivers' banks, finding an answer in one of our cruising guides. It indicates that it was built to tie barges to. Prior to 1959, when the St. Lawrence Seaway was completed, thousands of barges made the journey down the Erie Canal to the Hudson, transferring goods from the Great Lakes to New York City and other Atlantic ports. The morning's cool drizzle turned into all-out rain as the day wore on. We seemed to fight the tide and current all day, seeing speeds of only 5 to 5.5 knots, even though we were motoring at 2,500 RPM, that would normally move us at 6.5 knots. It's interesting to note that the Hudson is tidal its entire 135-mile length up to Albany, the state capital. From Albany, it's just a few miles further to Troy, then the Federal Lock. Drenched and tired, we arrived at Waterford, New York, and tied up at the free town dock that lies immediately below the first locks of the Erie Canal, the Waterford flight of 5 locks, E2 to E6, that provides a total lift of 170 feet that will tackle the following morning.